Greetings and welcome to this edition of
Positronic.
I'm Barry P. Cook. I'm here to talk to you about the latest episode of Star Trek Picard Season 3. It was called The Bounty. And as the episode begins, we see that Captain Vadic is trying to find the Titan, but it keeps jumping to warp at intervals from locations where it drops decoy beacons every time it warps in. Naturally, she's terribly unhappy about this. And Amanda Plummer portrayed that frustration in a way that creeped me out more than I could possibly tell you, and I was there for every second of it. She orders her crew to step up the search for Jack by looking into everyone that Jean-Luc has ever had any connection with. Next, we're on the Titan, and Beverly and Jean-Luc talk about how Jack's been having visions and whatnot. And it turns out that what's happening is that he has Irumodic syndrome, which of course Picard suffered from before he became an android. Beverly says it might be decades before it catches up with him because I guess she's got him on some medication that controls the symptoms. Then Jean-Luc and Jack talk about it, and Jack is quite put off by his situation. Jean-Luc says that he lived with the syndrome for decades, and of course he did, but not the symptoms of it, unless he started having symptoms in the true timeline, as opposed to the alternate Algorith Thinks timeline, at some point after Nemesis and the start of Picard Season 1, which I'm not sure would even qualify as decades, plural, without doing the math, but anyway, that's what he says. Next, Worf and Raffi arrive at the Titan's location and beam aboard the Titan. And not only did they play the Klingon theme, but they also play a slowed down version of the Next Gen theme as the old friends reacquainted themselves. And I was just beside myself with glee. And little did I know that was just the beginning. Anyway, it becomes very obvious in this, part that this cast is just everything. The chemistry that they exude with each other is a thing to behold, and whoever is writing the scenes where they're interacting understands who they are and how they relate to each other and who they are to each other just as well as the people who wrote TNG did, and it's friggin' glorious. On top of that, I want to say that I think we've finally seen enough of this current Worf at this point to know that Michael goddamn Dorn hasn't lost a day, hasn't lost an hour of connection with this character and his ability to make him seem like a real person. And it is just magnificent to behold as he, plays Worf in these episodes. It's just insane. Anyway, our crew then strategize about dealing with the changelings, and Raffi mentions that they should start by looking into Daystrom, which she says is a source of all kinds of things, including Starfleet weapons. But that seems odd to me because I don't recall Daystrom ever being about military applications. We know, and have known for a while that there's Section 31 and that Starfleet probably does in fact have black sites and so forth, but none of that should be connected to Daystrom. Daystrom was never military. It was always about scientific, exploration. It was never like the egghead arm of the military-industrial complex. I don't know why they went with Daystrom other than for name recognition. But anyway, when they come out of the meeting, there's a funny scene where Worf acknowledges the elephant in the room vis-a-vis Raffi and Seven being exes, and it was very funny. Next, Raffi, Worf, and Riker successfully infiltrate the Daystrom facility in orbit. But the Titan is detected as being present, and they have to flee without retrieving the landing party because the transporters were blocked. As our heroes are walking through the facility, they encounter various of its contents, including a genetically modified tribble, which can apparently now change shape and attack things, and some humor was had there at Worf's expense. What's extremely intriguing is that it also seems, based on a screen that briefly comes up, that Daystrom is in possession of a human being of indeterminate life signs, labeled James T. Kirk. So the question is that an Easter egg and a nod? Or are we, before this thing winds up, dare I speak the words, going to see William Shatner as Kirk once again? I'm just putting that energy out there into the universe. Anyway, we then see that the facility's computer system is scanning our heroes in order to deploy specific security measures. It's supposedly a very sophisticated AI security system that's, legendary. And so it's now looking at who exactly is there, and it's coming up with specific security, countermeasures. And at first, this manifests as a holographic crow, which is soon followed by an audible F-sharp note. and the manifestation of one Professor Moriarty hologram. And I was like, what? I mean, we knew he was going to be in it. We knew he was going to be holographic, but like, this was just such a interesting way to pull it off because, when you see him in the trailer, you go, oh God, they're going to involve Moriarty in the plot for member berries and it's going to be dumb and so forth and so on. But the fact of the matter is they came up with a really cool way to just work him in and then leave it and then back off from it, because he's only in it for a couple of seconds. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. It turns out that the Titan fled to the site of the Fleet Museum, where old ships go to retire, the centerpiece of which is the old space dock from the movies. And fantastic. And of course, this facility is run by none other than Geordi LaForge, who has very much matured over the years and is a different person with a very commanding presence, who was, it seemed to me, only barely cordial to his old friends and less than that to his daughter, who turns out to be one of a pair of daughters that he has, the second one being played by LeVar Burton's actual daughter. He and Picard talk about how they need to find a way to disguise the Titan so that it can't be found, but Geordi and his second daughter explain that there really isn't a way to do that for a number of reasons, one of which is that despite Geordi's objections made to Starfleet, all Starfleet ships now talk to each other like a hive mind. Back aboard Daystrom, the next sequence was so precious and moving, so splendid that words nearly fail me. It took me to the point that I had to pause the episode to collect myself before continuing to watch. It was poetry. It was perfection. And it ended with the landing party discovering what would appear to be an aged Soong-type android in a chamber aboard the station. And when we get to that part where we get to see exactly what's happening with that, I'll tell you why I was so in love with the sequence. But in the interim, it seems Geordi is a little upset because he feels as though Picard has put his daughter at risk. After we come to understand that, there's a very cool scene between Jack and Seven on the bridge of the Titan, while Geordi and Jean-Luc talk, about their situation, in which Seven is looking through some of the ships that are stored at the museum on the view screen, specifically Defiant, the Enterprise A, Voyager, and the HMS Bounty.
We're in the third month of our Vulcan exile, and it was Dr. McCoy with a fine sense of historical irony who decided on a name for our captured Klingon vessel.
Which it turns out nearly got left at the bottom of San Francisco Bay because its cloaking device reactivated after the whales was set free at the end of Star Trek IV, and it took a while for Starfleet to find it, a fact which gives Jack an idea. Back aboard Daystrom, it turns out that the aged Soong-type entity is what Anton Soong said in a recorded message was basically an organic synthetic hybrid made up of the combined consciousnesses of Lal, Data, B4, and Lore, and which ages, that he was able to work on once the ban on synthetic life, the creation of it or experimentation with it, was lifted after the events of season 1. Riker, upon learning this, seems to indicate that the appearance of Moriarty was an effort on behalf of this entity to communicate with Riker specifically, which I took as him saying that the security system at this institution is in fact the cybernetic mind of this entity, this being. Rafi then notes that the integration of the various consciousnesses wasn't actually completed before Anton Soong died, and that the various personalities were sort of in conflict with each other inside the entity's mind. And I keep saying the entity because it's various people, so I wasn't comfortable giving it a name at first, although they keep calling it Data, of course. But, this is why the prior sequence on the station was so crazy, because first of all, the guy that plays Moriarty was fantastic. But like I said, the way he was used was awesome. It wasn't just thrown in or tacked on or done flimsily in a way that then didn't really work. It was, they got it in, they made it poignant and make sense and walked away. They didn't linger on it to try to make something of it that would have made the episode stupid. And that's how you want to do a member berry. That's how you want to do an Easter egg. And The thing is, it was more than that, because that was just a layer of the whole thing, which was a demonstration of the fact that Data recognized Worf and Riker specifically, and did what he could do to communicate information to Riker, which was the password to getting into the room where he was located. And what it was Riker whistling the end sequence of the song Pop Goes the Weasel, which is what Data was trying to do when Riker first met him on the holodeck of the Enterprise D in Encounter at Farpoint.
First time I saw Data, he was leaning against a tree in the holodeck, trying to whistle. Funniest thing I ever saw. No matter what he did, he couldn't get the tune right.
And like I said before, it was poetry. It was just poetry. It's the kind of thing that Star Trek used to do. It's the kind of thing that was born as it relates to Star Trek, somewhat in the TOS cast films, but mostly on Next Gen. It was just everything. It was like they brought back Brandon Braga and Ron Moore and those folks and let them write Star Trek again. It was just incredible and perfect. And that's all there is to it. But moving on, because there's more. Back in the Titan, Geordi explains that he just can't help Jean-Luc because it would endanger his kids. And Picard respects that. But when Geordi asks to see Sydney and tells her that he wants her to stay at the museum with him and adopt a cover story that she was made to participate in what Jean-Luc was doing, unwillingly, she basically tells him to go get bent and called him a coward, and I thought it was awesome. We then learn that this entity that they're calling Data isn't just a security system protecting what our crew is after. He is what they are after, the manifest. So they have to get him out of there and take him with them. Back on the Titan, Jack recruits Geordi's daughters on a mission to steal the Bird of Prey's cloaking device. I do have a hard time believing it was still on it when it was decommissioned, because Starfleet would have removed it to prevent exactly what they're trying to do. But anyway, they then can't get the installation quite right when they get it back to the Titan. So Geordi, who realizes that he's pretty much now in for a penny, in for a pound, figures out how to correctly integrate it so that the Titan can warp back to the Daystrom installation to extract the OA team undetected, at least until they have to drop the cloak to use the transport. In order to buy time for Raffi and Worf to get away with the hybrid, whom everybody keeps calling Data, like I said, as opposed to something else that, more accurately reflects who it is, William T. Goddamn Riker takes on Starfleet security by himself and ends up getting hit with a transport inhibitor dart, preventing him from being beamed aboard the Titan as it flees the scene with what it came for. But Worf then vows to find and bring him home. Then, not knowing exactly what they're going to get, Geordi activates Data 2.0, as it were. In the next moment or two, we were visited by Data, Lore, and B4 as our heroes tried to discern from them what was taken from the Daystrom facility. In fact, even Sung was there somehow. And after a hiccup or two, we learned that what was taken was Picard's biological corpse, which is really weird. But before the episode ends, we see that Riker is being tortured for information by what appeared to be Starfleet security, but was in reality Vadic, who actually murders two security officers that she was pretending to be in charge of. And when Riker says that there's no way he's going to betray his friends for her, she reveals that she doesn't need him to do it for her because she has captured Diana. Or at least would appear to have done so. And that's where the episode ended. And, even though I saw it hours ago, the fact of the matter is that at this moment, my normally considerable vocabulary is somewhat failing me. And I can only come up with the most base words of praise to level at this episode beyond what I've already said. And while I'm feeling quite adequate as a presenter because of that, I blame said episode for this, because it was like, it was in its magnificence, its total perfection, completely unmitigatedly glorious. And, one might say marvelous. This was not fan service. This was not Easter eggs. This was not member berries. This episode was screencraft. It was storytelling. It was a deep homage. It was character development. It was Star Trek. And, you know, character development is more than just adding events in the life of a character. The day they got married, the next day they bought a car, the next day they fell over a tree stump. That's not character development. That's a sequence of events in a character's timeline. Character development is when the character changes or grows based on experience. And for all of these characters, that's been on display this whole season. But it really showed in this episode in the case of Geordi. And not in an uncomplicated way. It was just amazing to me that there's anyone over there that still has this much regard for Star Trek and this much writing ability that they pulled off this episode. Because, you know, at least in this series, we've not seen that at all up to this point. We've seen glimmers of it on Strange New Worlds, but this episode was just a miracle. A miracle. I had to pause the episode multiple times to collect myself. That's not an exaggeration. I couldn't see. I couldn't speak. I couldn't breathe. I mean, even the little scene where all they're doing is a shot, reverse shot with Jack and Seven talking about starships is layered with more than just a conversation about starships for the sake of member berries. It speaks about the characters, the scene. It speaks about the human condition. It adds to the breadth of what the show is trying to say. And I don't know, I guess part of the reason I'm so verklempt over it is because this has been absent from so much of Star Trek for so long. I mean, it's very present on Prodigy. I love Prodigy. But to see it in live action with these beloved characters, it was just unexpected and unbelievable. And what I mean is, Jack talks to Seven about, you know, what it is to me to have family and you know what it is to be human, and there's stuff like that mixed into the conversation, and it was brought on by Easter eggs of beloved ships. So it was they no words. I just keep saying no words. I'm stunned that they did it, and like I said, I had to stop the episode and collect myself numerous times. And, you know, in that praise, I mean to include what they did with the new characters in this episode. Jack, I was just talking about, but also Geordi's daughters and their relationship with their father. Because, you know, there's another scene later where Jack says, by the way, I realized after I last talked to you that I do, in fact, have some good characteristics and that they probably come from you. So they're doing all this Easter egg stuff. They're doing all this member berry stuff. And they're actually writing good character shit around it. Great character shit. Great human shit. And it's about goddamn time. So I'm including the new stuff they did in this episode with new characters when I say it was so good. They didn't just hit a lot of nostalgia beats in a good way. They also used the goddamn new characters to tell a compelling story and to make you feel something, which they didn't do with the new characters in the previous two seasons. This aspect of the show that I'm talking about, of the episode that I'm talking about, the father-children thing, would have stood on its own in any other show because it was substantive. It wasn't just gum flapping on behalf of some green keyboard jockey. It had something to say that means something. So this episode is just an unqualified masterpiece in every respect by which it could possibly be measured. And that's all there is to it. At the end of the episode, my heart was full, my face was wet, and I was in awe of the creators of each kind who made this episode of television. And I'm extremely excited to see where they're going to take this story next based on it, this episode. And I don't think there's anything any of us could imagine that would be off the table at this point. Not because they have a lot to pull from and they can just throw things in and give a bullshit excuse, but because they figured out how to do it right. Bringing Data back this time wasn't Picard season 2 Hugh. Throwing Moriarty in wasn't, Picard season 1 at the Rikers. They did stuff with those characters in this episode that meant something. And they're going to continue to do that with Data 2.0. We've already seen shades of it in like the 2 minutes Brent Spiner was in this episode. And I'm just chomping at the bit for the next episode. And when I say that I can't imagine that anything is, because they figured it out. They figured out a line of dialogue where Sung says, well, this one ages. That's it. And he says, why? Because that's the ultimate, one of the ultimate human experiences. And why deny my creations that? 5 or 6 words and done. It makes sense. And not only does it make sense, it's smart. It's resonant. That's a word. I meant to say it resonates. But that has my mind reeling at what they could pull off next. And by pull off, I mean actually pull off, not just do. There's a difference. And I'm thinking specifically about the screen in Daystrom that indicated that James T. Kirk's body is there. And I couldn't tell from the screen if James T. Kirk's body is alive, but William Shatner is. The question is, are they mad enough? Are they out of their minds enough to do it? I'll be disappointed if they don't, now that the possibility exists that they might. But I'll forgive it because they can't do everything right. They're not necessarily going to do everything. But from what we saw in this episode, I have every confidence that if they did it, it's going to be beautiful. So I hope they did. I do. Much as I hate William Shatner. But I also know that if they do, they're going to have to get the crash card because I will absolutely visit the other side. Anyway, I don't want to ramble. You get the picture. I was not okay during or after this episode for a while. Anyway, I will absolutely be back to recap and review the next episode once it's released. Until I return, I wish you peace and long life.